Hey everyone, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4 demo for the piece I call the Adherent. So it's been a while since I've put out a video, and I apologize for that. Things have been very busy, usual excuses, yada yada yada, but I finally got to putting this piece into a video. I did it a bit ago now. If you follow me on Instagram or any of the other places that I link, you know that I haven't posted a whole lot lately. I do have a bunch of sketches and drawings that are sort of in the works, but I've just been having to devote a lot of time to work and other things, so it's been a little crazy, but all good things, all just staying busy. So let's start talking about what's going on here. This is the last character for A Village Corrupted that I will likely be posting for a while. I do have a bit of a creature or monster design sitting around that I'm working on, but it's sort of in the pile of things I'll get to. I don't know how soon it'll be until I actually get to that. For now, let's talk about this character and where she came from. I have this sort of undercurrent in A Village Corrupted that has to do with religion. There's the character I did before, the Grave Templar, and then there are just sort of like hints at religious iconography. This, I would say, would be the first character that has very obvious religious overtones. Exactly how religious and exactly whether or not what she believes in is real, I'm not going to get into right now. That'll be for a later time. Really though, the important thing with her that I wanted to do, this is where the whole inspiration for her came from, was I wanted to do a character that had this simple, soft, quiet type vibe, and then I also wanted her to be in all white. I have another drawing of another character that actually isn't related to A Village Corrupted that I can't share, but that character had a set of armor on that I put all in white, and I always thought it was really cool. That character might come about, but I can't do anything with it right now. Point is, I thought that visual was really nice, and since a lot of the characters in A Village Corrupted are dark and gritty, I thought it'd be nice to just contrast them with a character that was wearing sort of like these white linens, just like this cloth. She's basically all cloth aside from the chain that's connecting the book to her. So I just thought that would be really fun. Also, it would present a little bit of a challenge, which is how do I put this character all in white and have her still feel like she's from this world, like she's anchored in this world. There's an aspect to her where she feels like she is removed from it, which is on purpose, but you know, while I wanted her to stand out, like if she was part of the group she would be very different in vibe, she still has to feel like she is a part of the world. So anyways, that was the challenge here. Now, as far as actually designing her costume, I wanted her to have a East meets West vibe. I wanted to go for what a lot of religious garb has, which is like these solids and just big flowing pieces of cloth, combine it with some Japanese influence, and really try to find a way that I could get her to feel like she's not distinctly from any type of culture or influenced by any one specific culture. I thought that something that would be a nice contrast also would be putting those heavy chains around her. The symbolism there, I think, is fairly strong, which is the idea of this thin, light-looking woman with just a thin frame who's wearing all of these big, billowy, soft cloth clothes. And then there's just this heavy metal chain around her with this book that she is holding. It's hard to tell whether or not she's burdened by it or whether or not she is gripping to it, like something that she cares greatly about or absolutely needs, and this is all deliberate. Now, as far as the actual drawing for this went, it took me a while to draw her because I was only carving out these like small bits of time. If it wasn't for the fact that I was inspired so strongly to finish her, she would probably be in the same bucket as some of these other pieces that I was referencing that I have in the works. I have a couple of other drawings that just the inspiration isn't strong enough to pull the time away or to make me like lose sleep or things like that in order to get it done. So luckily she did, so she got done, and I gotta say, you know, she's one of my favorite characters right now from this, both from the backstory, which I won't get into now, but her design in general, I'm very happy with the way it came out. So right now we're working on the hair. You could see in the rough sketch there wasn't a lot of playing with her design. I sort of had her fairly crystal clear in my mind. I very much knew that I wanted to go for very short black hair, and that I wanted her skin to be very pale, and that I wanted her outfit to be all white. And from a design standpoint of the actual clothing, I knew this East meets West, big solids and big pieces of cloth. I knew that that's where I wanted to go with all of that, and there was only a little bit of thinking that went into, like, yeah, I'll drape this here, and I'll have this layer with that, and this layer with that. There was a lot of layers. I wanted to make sure that was communicated, which is also why we get cutouts like that cross cutout that's on her arm, and the cutout on her hip that, you know, if it were like, say, a design from like a Ibuki from Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5, she would have like that cutout there, and their skin, obviously for the sake of this character, because this character isn't that sort of subtle sex symbol like Ibuki, it's just exposing more layers of cloth that's going on there. So right now just refining the hair, and then we start moving into the sleeves. Now you can see that her irises haven't been drawn yet. That's specifically because I didn't really know how I was going to treat the look of that. I knew that I wanted her eyes to have a little bit of a intensity even though she's not looking at you, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to handle that yet. Part of the interesting thing about the Village Corrupted pieces is that there were rules established fairly early on as to the visual identity, and I've been trying to keep to that as much as possible. So that means that if you look at my art, all the work that I do, you can see that I try to cover various things, and when I get sort of purposefully stuck into a theme, I try to keep to that. So while I might really want to do things like shadows, like none of the Village Corrupted pieces have significant shadows. There's just the occasional drop or something to push something forward or backward in space. Well, I might want to do things like that, or I might want to change, I might want to do lots of glow effects or something like that. I try to keep it all feeling very similar and using very limited means, just because that's sort of the look I established, and I'd like to keep it that way. I think one of the ones that was the biggest struggle was the Blood Mage. The official name that I ended up giving him is escaping me right now. The occultist. So the glowy blood effects that are on him, that was actually kind of a risk from my perspective, because nothing up until that point had really gotten that type of a treatment. It's like glowy, magic-y blood floating in the air type shit. And if I were just painting, if I was rendering everything in sort of the highest fidelity I'm capable of, I would have really just tried to sell the blood aspect of it. But instead I had to find simpler means, or I should say limited means, to communicate the same thing without making it feel like it's just too overdone. That type of thought process runs through all of the characters. That's why the ghost is rendered a certain way on the Graven Templar. That's why the eyes on this are a certain way. That's why the glow on the disciple's hand is just this big solid shape. I didn't go through a lot of effort to really define the way that the anatomy looks with the fingers. I left that to the lines because that's just what I was going for. I just realized that was the absolute longest way to say why I didn't draw the irises in until now in this piece. The eyes have been drawn in a bit ago now while I was in the middle of my ramble, and this is where I've decided, okay, well, the eyes will still be supported by lines, and if I want to do anything special with them beyond that, I'll just figure that out when I get there. Some of what I've had to do across these pieces is invent some things that just felt right during the sketch, and then I had to figure out like how they were going to work. This is a great example. She's got these pieces of cloth that come down off of the sort of duster aspect of what she's wearing, and then they go down into these cloth ribbons that get bound up in these metal brackets. It's similar to the way like a snap or a clip or whatever you want to call it on a bag might be, and then how the strap on the clip might go like in and up and down through the thing in order for you to tighten it and loosen it and all that. That's sort of the way that works there. It's a little rigid. Again, that goes towards the design aesthetic of a lot of the things that I've done for these, where things get squared off or things get a little stiff looking on purpose. That's the idea there. And so that was just trying to echo some of more of that cross language that's going on in her sleeve and elsewhere. So now we're going to finish off these big baggy pants. And you can see here I'm kind of trying to avoid the book as much as possible right now. I knew that sort of taking on the book would be just a big thing that needed to be done right. So I'm just trying to give as much information to the piece as possible, to the other elements, before I get there. And so here I've changed that little thin tie kind of thing into this bigger, bulkier, I guess, is that a cravat? I don't know. Anyways, that type of a thing. I just thought it looked softer. It looked a little bit more European, and I thought that could be more interesting. So now we're moving on to the book. The first thing I do is I'm establishing the actual design of it with a rough, and then I'll get a little bit more clinical as I attach certain aspects to it. Sometimes I get overly clinical on these types of things, and then it ends up just looking like shit or looking stiffer than I wanted to or whatever. On this, I do sort of a mix of just going in and just drawing it, just, you know, feeling confident in drawing it, and then there are other aspects where I get a little bit more precise. So now we're roughing in the hand that's underneath the other hand, trying to just make sure that it's roughed in really quickly so that we can see just what it sort of looks like, what position might feel natural, and then turning on the hand on top just to make sure that we don't spend too much time drawing something in that's not going to be seen. The way that the sort of like outer palm of the top hand gets super tangential with the thumb from the underhand, it really drives me crazy. And I remember when I was in the middle of doing it, I was like, that sucks, that's really obnoxious, and I can't remember if I actually fix it or not. I'm guessing I don't fix it, and that's just gonna make me crazy forever now, and I'm just staring at it constantly. But whatever. So now we move on to the book, trying to get that a little bit cleaner. Just using a couple of little reference points here and there to make sure that something feels fairly straight, but not getting too crazy about it. By crazy about it, I mean using too many line tool stuff, using too much where I'm creating maybe like a box and then warping it, just trying to go in a little bit natural. The idea of the actual book itself, clearly there's these metal brackets and metal pieces to it, and those should try to be stiff, which is what you see me doing right there, where I'm building it straight on and then warping it and then embellishing it once it's warped. But then the main body of the book is leather, or at the very least some sort of material that's softer, and that is much more hand done. And the hope is that I can rely on the fact that it won't be perfect to make it not look perfect and to make it look a little bit more organic. I say the hope is just because in general I treat art very experimentally. I don't have 100% of the confidence when I'm going into everything to know it's going to do exactly what I want to do. But in this case, I know that will be a method that will yield the general results that I'm looking for. I also nick it up a ton, probably a little bit more than I normally do, just because I really wanted to communicate that this is an old book. And then once all of these individual book pieces and the design of the book is done, the plan was always to then put like a big rod through the top of it that then goes to the chain. Which, if you've heard me complain about it in other pieces, drawing and painting chains is the most obnoxious thing in the world to me. I love chains, and I think that chains are a really cool design element, and especially nowadays with the way 3D animation and 3D modeling and stuff has gone. Anytime you can just cover a character in badass chains and they move and it looks really cool, I love that. But if you tell me like I have to do 12 months on Spawn or something, I'd go insane. So now here we've just laid out the brackets, these sort of like parentheses basically that appear on the opposite sides of the skull. You could see the way that I had built that a second ago. I just wanted to make it as accurate as possible so that this felt like some sort of a complete loop. And now I'm going in and just doing the lines that you're going to see of the skull. It's kind of a bummer because I like the way the skull looked, and obviously she's got her hands on top of it, but this is one of those things where by being very thorough and making that skull look cool and then still covering it, it definitely sells the book in the way that it's supposed to look and all of that. Then we got a couple of pages that are just sort of sticking out. Now we turn the rough back on to sort of say, okay, here's where we're at. Now, what's the next thing for us to do here? And then here's where I lament, oh, here we go, because now it's time to do the chain. So first design the rod, rough in the chain, and then there's the medallion, sort of the lock, whatever you want to call that covers the chain, or excuse me, not covers, but clamps the chain, connects the chain, whatever. And so now I'm trying to go in and much more cleanly draw out the way this is going to look. Now, how would you open a book if it has a rod through it? The idea is that the rod does come apart. It's not forever sealing the book or anything. So now I draw in one chain link, put a little bit of spiky embellishments on it to make it fit the theme, and then duplicate it a ton. And to me, this felt fine. I felt like I got away with doing a lot of good duplication work there, so I don't have to put too much energy into making this look exactly right. And then now going through and just sort of redrawing over it to get the right line weights where I want them to be, and add a few little nicks and scratches and imperfections just to make it look a little bit more hand-drawn in there. You'll see that there's some chains that are touching in the right way and then some chains that aren't, because the idea was that it's just getting a little bit jumbled up in those spots. So now we're going to finish off that medallion. I tried to not make this too clinical again, but there's a certain amount of precision that needs to happen because these are metal pieces that have been fashioned in a certain way. And then instead of doing just a straight up chain that goes across the entire shoulders, I wanted to make it look like it's designed in a way where it's supposed to be worn like this. It's not exactly the most pleasant thing to wear, but it isn't like a super painful, deliberate thing. But there's certainly a burden that is involved in this design. So we've got these sort of shoulder clamps. They're not really clamps, but I guess they're almost like pads. I don't know. It's something to make it slightly more comfortable for this whole thing to be hanging on your shoulders. But we still had some spikes on it because this is a Village Corrupted after all, and every character has to have some sort of spike on them. And then we have like a little bit of chains just for freedom of movement to connect to those pieces. Okay, so now we pull out and make sure the rough is on so we can see what we're doing here, and just add in the rest of those flowy cloth bits. Again, this stuff is all just an extension off of that one layer of her clothing that comes down, and there's the metal brackets, and then it starts flowing around and everything. There's a certain echoing that's going on here with the cloth and the brackets and what happens in the character, the battler, and there is some loose connection there. Now we're just finishing up the lines there on that bottom right piece of cloth, and we'll start going into coloring. So I knew that she was going to be all in white, but then it's like, okay, but what color do we put with the background? I tried to give each one of these characters a little bit of an identity as far as their color and then their background color, but obviously I don't want this to become like a big rainbow. So I returned back to red, which was used in like the flare, and obviously red was some part of the occultist, but not in the background. And I just felt that red, it was a good time to go back to red to really set her apart from the background. You can also see that as I go through here and I do a lot of my usual tricks, since this character is so pale and the clothes that she's wearing are going to be so light, there's a lot of balancing ultimately that has to happen. So you'll see me throw down a lot of colors that are all just various types of off-white, and then they all get adjusted as I'm going because there's a lot of balancing that needs to happen. For me, I usually work with a lot of bold colors that I don't really use in this particular series, so I'm much more comfortable balancing really bright color schemes. But with this, there's a lot of, okay, well, if she's all in off-whites, I don't just have sort of like straight out of the tube, so to speak, exactly what these are going to be. I have to put them down and then I have to adjust them a bunch. I find a lot of the times when I'm dealing with super pale skin or super dark skin, and then the costuming is anywhere near that, I have a lot of balancing that I need to do. But if I'm dealing with just sort of like a mid-range skin tone, and then the colors are all like brighter and more saturated, that's like the easiest thing for me to do. Same thing with the metal here. I wanted to make sure that I put a metal that felt like metal, but that it also was light enough and it didn't just make the whole thing heavy. And so while this metal is particularly light, it kind of had to be. So you could say that it's some sort of maybe like a dirty silver or some other metal that I just don't know that would work out really well for this, or maybe some sort of a treated metal. The idea here was to try and at least communicate, yeah, this is metal, but it's not such an obvious color. If you were just going to paint metal, it had to be a type of metal that worked specifically here. So we've got a lot of interesting choices here for colors, and by interesting, it's just because the gold had to be a certain gold, and all the whites had to be certain types of whites in order for it to work. And that was it's interesting to me because it's like, how do you make gold look gold, but it's got to be really pale? And how do you make the metal look metal and really pale? How do you put a character all in white, but you don't want it to be just white from head to toe? So you need to have some variation in there, and you need to adjust it as you go. You can see all the shines that are getting put in here. They don't actually capture like a red light that's coming down, because I know I'm going to put a red over the whole thing, and I know that the shines need to be sort of bright in order to really pull off the fact that they're metallic. So they're a little on the shiny side, but they're still beaten up and damaged. We got that jewel in the center of her neck. Again, this is one of those things we're trying to balance how jewel tony it really gets. And so I tried to keep it simple but still read what it needed to be. Now we're putting the rim light from the pale red light coming off in the background. And the next step we're going to do is we're going to start refining the background. You can see here it's all blobbed in. It's not very high detail. And so now we're going to start adding some more stalagmites and a little bit of detail here and there. You can see I'm carving out some of the ground so that we can get a little bit more of the layering from the background, midground, foreground. And then we also add like a little monster horde sort of off in the distance coming closer. I tried to get little things like that in the background, but it doesn't always work out. You can see it maybe a little bit better in the close-up pan that's coming up next. And so now it's just a couple of the last minute details and applying the last effects pass, which is some lighting and some blurs and stuff. And there you go. That is the finished Adherent. So here you can see the lines up close. And then here's the final pan, so you can actually see those monsters in the background. At least a little bit. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. Please consider liking and subscribing, and we're going to get to more of these now. I hope to have a little bit more free time, and I'll see you on the next video. Also, if you enjoy using Discord, Zat's Art Chat on Discord has been doing pretty well. There's a lot of great people on there doing some fun stuff, so I hope you stop by and say hi. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.